The Noble Experiment, Jackie Robinson as told to Alfred Duckett. In 1910, Branch Rickey was a coach for Ohio Wesleyan. The team went to South Bend, Indiana for a game. The hotel management registered the coach and team but refused to assign a room to a black player named Charlie Thomas. In those days, college ball had a few black players. Mr. Rickey took the manager aside and said he would not move the entire team to another hotel unless the black athlete was accepted. The threat was a bluff because he knew the other hotels also would have refused accommodations to a black man. While the hotel manager was thinking about the threat, Mr. Rickey came up with a compromise. He suggested a cot be put in his own room, which he would share with the unwanted guest. The hotel manager wasn't happy about the idea, but he gave in. Years later, Branch Rickey told the story of the misery of that black player to whom he had given a place to sleep. He remembered that Thomas couldn't sleep. He sat on that cot, Mr. Rickey said, and was silent for a long time. Then he began to cry, tears he couldn't hold back. His whole body shook with emotion. I sat and watched him, not knowing what to do, until he began tearing at one hand with the other, just as if he were trying to scratch the skin off of his hands with his fingernails. I was alarmed. I asked him what he was trying to do to himself. "It's my hands," he sobbed. "They're black. If only they were white, I'd be as good as anybody then, wouldn't I, Mr. Rickey? If only they were white." "Charlie," Mr. Rickey said, "the day will come when they won't have to be white." 35 years later, while I was lying awake nights, frustrated, unable to see a future, Mr. Rickey, by now the president of the Dodgers, was also lying awake at night, trying to make up his mind about a new experiment. He had never forgotten the agony of that black athlete. When he became a front office executive in St. Louis, he had fought behind the scenes against the custom that consigned black spectators to the Jim Crow section of the Sportsman Park, later to become Bush Memorial Stadium. His pleas to change the rules were in vain. Those in power argued that if blacks were allowed a free choice of seating, white businesses would suffer. Branch Rickey lost that fight, but when he became the boss of the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1943, he felt the time for equality in baseball had come. He knew that achieving it would be terribly difficult. There would be deep resentment, determined opposition, and perhaps even racial violence. He was convinced he was morally right, and he shrewdly sensed that making the game a truly national one would have healthy financial results. He took his case before the startled directors of the club, and using persuasive eloquence, he won the first battle in what would be a long and bitter campaign. He was voted permission to make the Brooklyn club the pioneer in bringing blacks into baseball. Winning his director's approval was almost insignificant in contrast to the task which now lay ahead of the Dodger president. He made certain that word of his plans did not leak out, particularly to the press. Next, he had to find the ideal player for his project, which came to be called Rickey's Noble Experiment. This player had to be one who could take abuse, name-calling, rejection by fans and sports writers and fellow players, not only on opposing teams, but his own. He had to be able to stand up in the face of merciless persecution and not retaliate. On the other hand, he had to be a contradiction in human terms. He still had to have spirit. He could not be an Uncle Tom. His ability to turn the other cheek had to be predicated on his determination to gain acceptance. Once having proven his ability as player, teammate, and man, he had to be able to cast off humbleness and stand up as a full-fledged participant whose triumph did not carry the poison of bitterness. Unknown to most people, and certainly to me, after launching a major scouting program, Branch Rickey had picked me as that player. The Rickey talent hunt went beyond national borders. Cuba, Mexico, Puerto Rico, Venezuela, and other countries where dark-skinned people lived had been checked out. Mr. Rickey had learned that there were a number of black players, war veterans mainly, who had gone to these countries despairing of finding an opportunity in their own country. The manhunt had to be camouflaged. If it became known he was looking for a black recruit for the Dodgers, all hell would have broken loose. The gimmick he used as a cover-up was to make the world believe that he was about to establish a new Negro League. In the spring of 1945, he called a press conference and announced that the Dodgers were organizing the United States League composed of all black teams. This, of course, made blacks and pro-integration whites indignant. He was accused of trying to uphold the existing segregation at the same time capitalize on black players. Cleverly, Mr. Rickey replied that his league would be better organized than the current ones. He said its main purpose eventually was to be absorbed into the majors. It is ironic that by coming very close to telling the truth, he was able to conceal that truth from the enemies of integrated baseball. Most people assumed that when he spoke of some distant goal of integration, Mr. Rickey was being a hypocrite on this issue, as so many of baseball leaders had been. Black players were familiar with this kind of hypocrisy. When I was with the Monarchs, shortly before I met Mr. Rickey, Wendell Smith, then sports editor of the Black Weekly Pittsburgh Courier, had arranged for me and two other players from the Negro League to go to a tryout with the Boston Red Sox. The tryout had been brought about because a Boston City councilman had frightened the Red Sox management. Councilman Isidore Muchnick threatened to push a bill through banning Sunday baseball unless the Red Sox hired black players. Sam Jethro of the Cleveland Buckeyes, Marvin Williams of the Philadelphia Stars, and I had been grateful to Wendell for getting us a chance in the Red Sox tryout, and we put our best efforts into it. However, not for 1 minute did we believe the tryout was sincere. The Boston club officials praised our performance, let us fill out application cards, and said, "So long." We were fairly certain they wouldn't call us, and we had no intention of calling them. Incidents like this made Wendell Smith as cynical as we were. He didn't accept Branch Rickey's new league as a genuine project, and he frankly told him so. During this conversation, the Dodger boss asked Wendell whether any of the three of us who had gone to Boston was really good major league material. Wendell said I was. I will be forever indebted to Wendell because, without his even knowing it, his recommendation was in the end partly responsible for my career. At the time, it started a thorough investigation of my background. In August 1945, at Comiskey Park in Chicago, I was approached by Clyde Sukeforth, the Dodger scout. Blacks have had to learn to protect themselves by being cynical, but not cynical enough to slam the door on potential opportunities. We go through life walking a tightrope to prevent too much disillusionment. I was out on the field when Sukeforth called my name and beckoned. He told me the Brown Dodgers were looking for top ball players, that Branch Rickey had heard about me and sent him to watch me throw from the hole. He had come at an unfortunate time. I had hurt my shoulder a couple of days before that, and I wouldn't be doing any throwing for at least a week. Sukeforth said he'd like to talk with me anyhow. He asked me to come to see him after the game at the Stevens Hotel. Here we go again, I thought, another time-wasting experience. But Sukeforth looked like a sincere person, and I thought I might as well listen. I agreed to meet him that night. When we met, Sukeforth got right to the point. Mr. Ricky wanted to talk to me about possibility of becoming a Brown Dodger. If I could get a few days off and go to Brooklyn, my fare and expenses would be paid. At first, I said that I couldn't leave my team and go to Brooklyn just like that. Sukforth wouldn't take no for an answer. He pointed out that I couldn't play for a few days anyhow because of my bum arm. Why should my team object? That's Jackie Robinson and Branch Rickey on signing day. I continued to hold out and demand to know what would happen if the Monarchs fired me. The Dodger scout replied quietly that he didn't believe that would happen. I shrugged and said I'd make the trip. I figured I had nothing to lose. Branch Rickey was an impressive-looking man. He had a classic face, an air of command, a deep booming voice, and a way of cutting through red tape and getting down to basics. He shook my hand vigorously and after a brief conversation, sprang the first question. "You got a girl?" he demanded. It was a hell of a question. I had two reactions. Why should he be concerned about my relationship with a girl? And second, while I thought, hoped, and prayed I had a girl, the way things had been going, I was afraid she might have begun to consider me a hopeless case. I explained this to Mr. Rickey and Clyde. Mr. Rickey wanted to know all about Rachel. I told him of our hopes and plans. "You know, you have a girl," he said heartily. "When we get through today, you may want to call her up because there are times when a man needs a woman by his side." My heart began racing a little faster as I sat there speculating. First, he asked me if I really understood why he had sent for me. I told him what Claude Sukforth had told me. "That's what he's supposed to tell you," Mr. Rickey said. "The truth is, you are not a candidate for the Brooklyn Brown Dodgers. I've sent for you because I'm interested in you as a candidate for the Brooklyn National League Club. I think you can play in the major leagues. How do you feel about it?" My reaction seemed like some kind of weird mixture churning in a blender. I was thrilled, scared, and excited. I was incredulous. Most of all, I was speechless. "You think you can play for Montreal?" he demanded. I got my tongue back. "Yes," I answered. Montreal was the Brooklyn Dodgers' top farm team. The players who went there and made it had an excellent chance at the big time. I was busy reorganizing my thoughts while Mr. Rickey and Clyde Sukforth discussed me briefly, almost as if I weren't there. Mr. Rickey was questioning Clyde. Could I make the grade? Abruptly, Mr. Rickey swung his swivel chair in my direction. He was a man who conducted himself with great drama. He pointed a finger at me. "I know you're a good ball player," he barked. "What I don't know is whether you have the guts." I knew it was all too good to be true. Here was a guy questioning my courage. That virtually amounted to him asking me if I was a coward. Oh, I lost my spot. Sorry, guys. I pushed it up too far. Where am I? I found it. Sorry, you guys. That virtually amounted to him asking me if I was a coward. Mr. Rickey, or no Mr. Rickey, that was an insinuation hard to take. I felt the heat coming into my cheeks. Before I could react to what he said, he leaned forward in his chair and explained. I wasn't just another athlete being hired by a ball club. We were playing for big stakes. This was the reason Branch Rickey's search had been so exhaustive. The search had spanned the globe and narrowed down to a few candidates, then finally to me. When it looked as though I might be the number one choice, the investigation of my life, my habits, my reputation, and my character had become an intensified study. I've investigated you thoroughly, Robinson, Mr. Rickey said. One of the results of this thorough screening were reports from California athletic circles that I had been a racial agitator at UCLA. Mr. Rickey had not accepted these criticisms on face value. He had demanded and received more information and came to the conclusion that if I had been white, people would have said, "Here's a guy who's a contender, a competitor." After that, he had some grim words of warning. "We can't fight our way through this, Robinson. We've got no army. There's virtually nobody on our side. No owners, no umpires, very few newspapermen, and I'm afraid that many fans will be hostile. We'll be in a tough position. We can swim only if we can, we can win only if we can convince the world that I'm doing this because you're a great ball player and a fine gentleman." He had me transfixed as he spoke. I could feel his sincerity, and I began to get a sense of how much this major step meant to him. Because of his nature and his passion for justice, he had to do what he was doing. He continued. The rumbling voice, the theatrical gestures were gone. He was speaking from a deep, quiet strength. "So there's more than just playing," he said. "I wish it meant only hits, runs, and errors, only the things that they put on in the box score. Because you know, yes, you would know, Robinson, that a baseball box score is a democratic thing. It doesn't tell how big you are, what church you attend, what color you are, or how your father voted in the last election. It just tells what kind of baseball player you were on that particular day." And that's Jackie Robinson crosses the plate after one of his many home run hits for the Montreal Royals. I interrupted. "But it's the box score that really counts, that and that alone, isn't it?" "It's all that ought to count," he replied. "But it isn't. Maybe one of these days it will be all that counts. That is one of the reasons I've got you here, Robinson. If you're a good enough man, we can make this a start in the right direction. But let me tell you, it's going to take an awful lot of courage." He was back to the crossroads question that made me start to get angry minutes earlier. He asked it slowly and with great care. "Have you got the guts to play the game no matter what happens?" "I think I can play the game, Mr. Rickey," I said. The next few minutes were tough. Branch Rickey had to make absolutely sure that I knew what I would face. Beanballs would be thrown at me. I would be called the kind of names which would hurt and infuriate any man. I would be physically attacked. Could I take all this and control my temper, remain steadfastly loyal to our ultimate aim? He knew I would have terrible problems and wanted me to know the extent of them before I agreed to the plan. I was 26 years old, and all my life, back to the age of 8 when a little neighbor girl called me names, I had believed in payback, retaliation. The most luxurious possession, the richest treasure anybody has, is his personal dignity. I looked at Mr. Rickey guardedly, and in that second, I was looking at him not as a partner in a great experiment, but as an enemy, a white man. I had a question, and it was the age-old one about whether or not you sell your birthright. "Mr. Rickey," I asked, "are you looking for a Negro who is afraid to fight back?" I will never forget the way he exploded. "Robinson," he said, "I'm looking for a ball player with guts enough not to fight back." After that, Mr. Rickey continued his lecture on the kind of thing I'd be facing. He not only told me about it, but he acted out the part of a white player charging into me, blaming me for the accident, and calling me all kinds of foul racial names. He talked about my race, my parents, in language that was almost unendurable. "They'll taunt you and goad you," Mr. Rickey said. "They'll do anything to make you react. They'll try to provoke a race riot in the ballpark. This is the way to prove to the public that a Negro should not be allowed in the major league. This is the way to frighten the fans and make them afraid to attend the games." Jackie makes the big time with the Brooklyn Dodgers. If hundreds of black people wanted to come to the ballpark to watch me play, and Mr. Ricky tried to discourage them, would I understand that he was doing it because the emotional enthusiasm of my people could harm the experiment? That kind of enthusiasm would be as bad as the emotional opposition of prejudiced white fans. Suppose I was a shortstop. Another player comes down from first, stealing, flying in the spikes high, and cuts me on the leg. As I feel the blood running down my leg, the white player laughs in my face. How do you like that, boy? He sneers. Could I turn the other cheek? I didn't know how I would do it. Yet I knew that I must. I had to do it for so many reasons. For Black youth, for my mother, for Ray, for myself. I had already begun to feel I had to do it for Branch Rickey. I was offered and agreed to sign later a contract with a $3,500 bonus and $600 a month salary. I was officially a Montreal Royal. I must not tell anyone except Ray and my mother. The end.